Tony, I haven't got many slides, so I will do a bit of a canter through, and some of it's been covered already by my colleagues, because obviously inevitably there's quite a lot of overlap between the subject matter. So hopefully this will be relatively brief. So what is a local list? Well, that's oh, sorry, just moving my, a weird toolbar appeared so I can read my screen. Right. So as has been covered by my colleagues, there's a distinction between designated and non-designated heritage assets, and local lists are one way of identifying non-designated heritage assets, which is usually done at a local authority level. They can be almost anything: buildings, monuments, sites, places, areas. The list is broad. They can also include archaeological areas. They are assets that have local character, so that's where they fit into the sort of hierarchy of significance. But they don't have they don't meet the criteria for national designation, but they can capture and reflect what's valuable to local communities. By being identified on a local list, they will be given material weight in the planning process, not necessarily guaranteeing retention. They don't have the statutory protection, but they will be given that weight and taken into consideration when a planning application is being determined. I see them also as a source of information for owners. They are custodians of what they own. If they are aware of their significance, they may well take greater care on those features and look after them, even if they're not subject to any form of formal control. As has been covered by my colleagues, there's a link back to the HER, and part of this project is to get local lists, the local heritage assets onto the HER so that they can be embedded in their processes and revealed in searches, etc. And there's also quite a link up with placemaking. Also, you know, what we have on local lists is locally distinctive, and in where regeneration schemes are taking place, I think it's important that things that are recognised locally are reflected in change, so that change can be on an informed basis and take account of what's significant locally. Oops, what's going on here? There we go. This slide from Historic England, the top set of photos has already been covered, so they are designated heritage assets, the whole suite of them. Local lists, local heritage assets can be broad and varied: buildings, pieces of street art, civic structures, street furniture, etc. We haven't got any wrecks, as has been pointed out, but parks and gardens and landscapes can come onto local lists where they don't get identified as registered parks of gardens, and there are actually only quite a few of those in Surrey, so this is an opportunity to identify others in that category. So the local heritage list project that I'm part of is been funded by what was MHCLG. They gave funding to 22 project areas at the beginning of last year under their Build Back Better initiative, and part of the planning reform agenda that is still ongoing. Relatively patchy coverage of local lists across the country, possibly down to an absence of very clear national guidance and framework until recently. The funding is to develop local heritage asset lists. They're also known as local lists, so they're interchangeable, they are the same thing. The funding was for 2 temporary posts at Surrey, and I'm one of those. The other one is within the HER. And the project will be running until the end of this year. I'm working with 6 of the 11 districts and boroughs listed there. The others were approached, but in most cases have their own up-to-date list. These that wanted to be part of the project for various reasons. They had lists that were out of date or needed reviewing, or indeed didn't have a list at all in the case of Mole Valley. And a significant part of what the government wants to see as an output of this project, or part of it, is that we engage with the public to see what they feel is significant locally. So I've been working quite closely under the guidance that has been issued by Historic England, which has been mentioned earlier, and run the project along the lines of the sort of stages within this, to give it that sort of consistency with other projects, but obviously we've done it our way and developed it our way as well. The project started in July last year. The first step was to develop some criteria, which I did in conjunction and in consultation with various groups, including yourselves at the Society and others, and their input was very useful and fed into the final criteria. And obviously we involved the partner districts as well, and the decision was made, in order to make it onto a local list, assets would have to meet at least 2 of those criteria, and here are the criteria. No hard and fastness about this, and there's a lot of subjectivity and whether something meets something or not, but I found it quite a useful way of sort of chunking up what's important about things, whether it's something that's really prominent or something that's has of a particular age, or has artistic or architectural value, for example. So so far, so the next stage we moved on to was identifying what could go onto the local list, and that's a combination of reviewing existing lists where they exist and also seeking nominations from the public. And that's we did towards the end of last year. There was an online form that people could fill in and nominate using a map, so a GIS-based system, which actually proved very successful, that people could pin their nominations and give us a bit of detail about them and submit photographs as well. Publicise this through the participating districts and boroughs, and very pleased that we had around about 1,000 nominations across the 6, which was a surprise but a pleasant one, and some really good nominations coming forward across the spectrum of types of assets, lots of street furniture, structures, trackways, we had memorials, public spaces, etc. And here's just a snapshot of some of them. We had quite a few sort of burial grounds and mausoleums and chapels, some modern buildings, you know, a lot of them were public spaces, public buildings, very prominent in the public realm, but also quite a few of sort of military and defensive installations as well, and gardens and bridges over railways and historic trackways. So that's just a little snapshot of some of the things that were nominated. So at the moment I'm reviewing the existing lists. Largely there wasn't a lot of information on there as why things were on the existing list, and they're incredibly building centric. So one of the aims of this project is to widen that into, not to exclude buildings, they are key part, but also the other assets that I've mentioned. We've been helped by some volunteers, including some students from Kingston University, who's been doing some online research for us and doing some of the descriptions of the assets. But I've also used other sources. Obviously, we've got the HER and what's on there, DBRG reports, maps, and just various information that's online in order to build a picture about, just do the research so that we've got something to base the criteria on, and ultimately each asset on this list will have a short description and a summary of its significance using the criteria. So just touching on the archaeological aspect of this, archaeological sites can be on local lists, but as Tony and Nick outlined earlier, we've got a well-established system of identifying, as part of the planning process, you know, archaeological sites through the CSIs and AHAPs. So by doing that, the non-designated heritage assets are taken into account in the planning process. So my lists aren't necessarily going heavy on archaeological sites where that already exists, but there's obviously quite a close, you know, complementary designation, in that archaeological value of some of the assets is one of the criteria, particularly where you've got multi-phase buildings, or parks and gardens where one component of them is they may well have archaeological evidence that feeds into the significance that you know, for the reason they're going to be on the local list. And as part of this, some of the nominations may well get referred back to be considered as AHAPs under the next review. So next steps for me are to produce draft lists for each of the districts and boroughs. They will be their lists and not Surrey's lists, but I'm doing the legwork. I've done 2 and there are 4 more to go. I estimate there'll be around about 300 to 400 assets on each of the lists. After that, they will work their way through the consultation and adoption processes through the individual districts and boroughs, and at that point they may well take a different journey and have different processes of consultation. Once adopted, they can be given weight in the planning process, and I would anticipate that each of the districts will probably then adopt the criteria or a version of them, so that they can then have a review process and a way of assessing assets for inclusion on the list as they go forward, or indeed reviewing them for things to come off. One of the other aspects of this is that as part of the project, Historic England has put in place this sort of sub-project called Local to Statutory. They anticipate that quite a few assets that coming through this process will be elevated or put forward for statutory listing. I have come across quite a few, and so I think that's something that we will be doing as part of this project. If they don't go on, if they're not statutory listed, they will be, they will remain on the local lists. And going right back to where we started, all the local list information will then be on the HER to be revealed on searches to inform heritage statements and indeed all the other ways in which the HER is used to inform planning and other processes. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you.